What is up guys, JTX here. This is going to be an update to my 3.26 Bleed Bow League Starter Slayer. A couple changes from the patch notes, nothing really major that affects our build too much. The main one being the change to Ralakesh's Impatience. Instead of having all three of these lines, you only get to have one of them at a time now. This is a slight nerf to our build that we'll have to kind of work around, but there's an easy way of fixing it and still achieving pretty much the same amount of power. For those of you that are new to the build or new to the playstyle, this is a split arrow and puncture slayer, which is a bow character that uses bleed as its main form of damage. The core identity of the build is a frenzy stacking slayer that uses the Olesya's belt with the Ralakesh Impatience combo to double dip into getting affliction and frenzy charges, and then also getting endurance charges because of Slayer's masterful form node. And essentially scaling charges to an insane level, giving you massive damage and also defense. I've league started with Bleed Bow for almost, I don't know, a year, almost 2 years now. It's been my go-to league starter for a good reason. It's a great mapper, doesn't take too much gear to get off the ground, and they can scale incredibly well with a bit of investment. The character that you're seeing here has done everything in the game possible. It's my tier 17 farmer and also my uber pinnacle boss killer. Obviously getting to this point takes a lot of investment, but you can achieve around 90% of this effect with a fraction of the price. The version that you're seeing here is a fully min-max version of the character and something that you can aspire towards if you do want to push your character to the limit. A big shout out to my boy Sprightly, who kindly lent me his gear for the video so I can show you what a fully pushed out version of the character could look like. His gear was actually more insane than mine, and it's something that you can really push for if you want to play the character to the very end game. Now, I want to talk about the main change for this build, which is the Ralakesh boots no longer giving all three types of charges. We never cared about power charges in the first place because we go resolute technique, so we don't care about crit. It's really important that when we do get Ralakesh's Impatience that you go for the one with frenzy charges. Because of the way how Olesya's Delight works, it makes your frenzy charges convert into affliction charges, and without having these boots, you actually can't get frenzy charges or count as having frenzy charges. So it's really important that when we do get the boots, go for the frenzy charge version, and then when you get the belt, you get affliction charges on top of your frenzy charges. And the way we get endurance charges now is just using a Replica's Farrul's Fur. Obviously, it's a very expensive replica item, but it is kind of the chase item that you need for the build to really pop off. In the meantime, there are a lot of other ways of generating endurance charges. You can use Addresser's Defiance, or you can get cluster jewels or nodes on the tree that give you endurance charges on kill, and that's also fine for almost 99% of mapping. The reason why I think that Farrul's Fur could even be better than our old setup using a Restless Ward, which used to give us a lot of regeneration and a lot of movement speed, is the fact that you instantly get up to your maximum number of frenzy charges, and in this case, it will turn into our affliction charges. One of the problems with the build in the past is you need to generate all 12 affliction charges to be doing your maximum amount of damage, so it takes a bit of time to get those frenzy stacks up or get those affliction stacks up in a fight. You're going to be relying on your mana fort setup with frenzy here, and then eventually you'll get to your max charges. With a Replica Farrul's Fur, as soon as you turn Aspect of the Cat on, you get all 12 affliction charges straight away, and you also count as having all 12 of your frenzy charges. This gives us much more consistent damage uptime for our build. The other main change for the build is the removal of runecrafts, so we no longer have access to trigger Shock Ground or any of the Kalguran runecrafts from King's March. Instead, we get rune graphs now on our passive tree, which could be really cool. There'll probably be a lot of stuff to find out once the patch actually goes live. So in the meantime, instead of having the enchantment on your bow for trigger Shock Ground, you probably use a Tempering Orb eventually on your final physical bow. Just get it as high as fizz as possible. And everything else in your gear is essentially going to be still the same as 3.25. You're going to be looking for frenzy charges everywhere on your gear if possible. So on your gloves, on your rings. Now obviously with a frenzy stacking build, it can be very expensive. So you're not going to have a lot of insane gear to start, especially at League Start. The easiest way to get this character off the ground is to try get as many frenzy charges as possible for as cheap as possible. You have 3 frenzy charges by default, and then you get 3 passives through the tree. You get 1 from your Ascendancy node, giving you 7 just from your tree alone. And then you get 1 additional frenzy charge from your Olesya's Delight belt. Make sure you don't use this belt without having the Ralakesh's Impatience, because it essentially gets rid of your frenzy charges. Make sure you pick up a Ralakesh Impatience first, and then Olesya's Delight. And then finally, you can go for a Corrupted Frenzy charge on a glove. Doesn't really matter what base early on, whatever is possible, just go for a max frenzy charge. That will give you a good solid 9 frenzy charges very early on, and then essentially give you 9 endurance charges, and also 9 affliction charges. Later on, you can go for a +1 max frenzy on your synth bow, crafted yourself, and then go for a +1 frenzy on a Circle of Guilt that you could Calendra's Touch. Those are all early endgame options for the build to get more frenzies. Now, early on into the league, as we are playing a Slayer, you don't have access to the Gladiator Bleed explosions until much later, until you pick up the Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flesh jewels. In the meantime, you run a pair of hemophilias for all your early mapping. I pretty much ran it all last league until tier 16 maps, and it was totally fine. And your main concern for early gearing is just getting your spell suppress capped, getting a good amount of life and resistance on your gears before you start saving up for some more of those specific unique items like Ralakesh and Olesyas. Now with the changes to 3.26, there are also other Ascendancy options besides Slayer for Bleed Bow. The first one being Elementalist with new Golem Ascendancies, with the Chaos Golem giving dot multi, and the new change to the Herald Ascendancy, giving you massive effect on your Herald of Purity. That could be an alternate way of scaling a Bleed Bow build without having to rely on Frenzy and Affliction stacking. You can also go Perfect Agony on this, and then scale the right side of the tree. The only challenges with the build is if you're going to play an Elementalist, you start at the Witch. A lot of the good nodes that you want are towards the bottom right hand side of the tree where the Duelist starts. So just be aware that if you do go that path, there will be some traveling to do, and then the nodes won't be as efficient as possible, but it's also a very viable build. The other honorary Bleed Bow build that I really am interested in is a Champion variant. With the changes to the Champion Ascendancy, there's a lot of potential to be a Fortify, Armor, Evasion stacking type build that could really get an insane level of defense, and almost like a mixed match of both Slayer and Champion could be the ideal build going forward. I could imagine you get incredibly tanky for a version of the build like this. And also because with dot builds capping out at 35.7 million DPS, a lot of the damage is kind of unneeded towards the end, so maybe building more defenses could be the way to go. As you'll notice in my POB, this build in the endgame doesn't actually require Snipe. Snipe is incredibly good as an early game gem for giving an insane multiplier to your puncture. But in this version of the build, you get to a point where you have so much damage that Snipe is unnecessary, and you can run Puncture as a 6th link without Snipe and just use it as a regular skill. This is one of the biggest complaints I've heard from people playing a build with Snipe, is essentially this channeling playstyle of Snipe. With a build like this, when you get to a certain point, you can drop Snipe entirely and just enjoy the Puncture playstyle. Now, I have my updated POBs for 3.26 in the video description. I also have a max roll guide coming out for this build that'll cover from early game all the way until end game, talking about certain pieces of the gear. That guide will be updated a few days into the league start as I find out more information about the new gear, gems, and potentially new things that we find. There might be a lot of things that the build can take advantage of, so please keep an eye out in the description for when the max roll guide comes up. As always, I'll have a notes section in my POB, so you can find out where to pick up all the gems. The POB also includes sets of gear from my SSF Act 10 run, all the way up into the Frenzy stacking endgame, and then I'll also update my trees to have the endgame variants. But initially for League Start, you only really care about early to mid-game maps, so please base your gear off that. POB will also contain trees from level 1 all the way until your endgame cluster setup. And I'll be putting out a video with the endgame setup after we discover all the new stuff in the build. So there will be a new POB coming out with a new video a couple days into the league after we discover anything new. Basic tip for the build is just getting a hemophilia as soon as possible. It helps a lot out with your clear. Your main priority will be upgrading your bow for a high physical damage as much as possible. Make sure you quality your bow as much as possible during the acts. Also take advantage of the vendor recipes to get yourself guaranteed bows with increased fizz. You can also use Faustus or the Merchant to trade your gold to roll for a bow. Always don't forget, with the crafting bench, you can always craft on either flat fizz or increased fizz, depending on what you get on your weapon. If you get a flat fizz weapon, you can put on increased fizz and vice versa. Mainly just cap your reses early on and then go for spell suppress as you head into early red tier maps. That'll make a big difference, and then you'll be swapping into your frenzy stacking after you pick up a few pieces of gear. This iteration of the Bleed Bow character or the Bleed Bow archetype has been the strongest in the history of PoE. It's both fast, tanky, and does an insane amount of damage both to single target and has insane clear. I really enjoyed playing this build last league. It pretty much did everything I wanted it to do and more. I'll be league starting it again this league, so if you do want to have a look at how the character progresses, you can follow along on my Twitch stream at JTX. Hopefully you guys have a really good start for the league. I'm very excited to try out the new league and get a breath of fresh air. I'll be very excited to see how far this build can be pushed with the addition of mercenaries. I think that we might even see a higher potential for this build than the previous league. I really do appreciate all the support that you guys have and all the interest in the build. And as always guys, I will catch you in the next video.